No audio problems? Okay. What I'm going to do is sort of walk you through how I got interested in what I'm going to talk about today. There are a couple of other pieces of media that I'll show you, but I think you'll be perhaps as surprised as I was. So on November 16th, 2006, I was lounging on my couch, like I do on many nights, flipping channels. And I happened to catch a very interesting Larry King Live episode where the name of the particular episode, if you want the transcripts, is actually called Summers Debates Doctor. And Suzanne Summers had previously come out with a book called Ageless, where she had promoted it on Larry King Live a few months before. The book I believe was released November 1st, 2006. She had just been on Larry King Live. There's the book. I'm sure you've seen it in your local bookstores. After the book was released, a number of criticisms were leveled at the information in the book. And it wasn't so much that there were descriptions of hormone replacement therapy and bioidentical hormones that were somewhat creative, as frequently happens in healthcare books. They're not medical explanations. They can be misleading. But what actually happens is that in her book Ageless, she sends her readers to an unregulated and unethical protocol by this woman. T.S. Wiley and the Wiley Protocol are represented as a legitimate clinical study that's being done by T.S. Wiley. T.S. Wiley, we learn, is actually not. She's an anthropologist. She's actually taken courses in anthropology at the undergraduate level, but nobody actually knows if she. I don't think she has any evidence that she's graduated college. I think that we're satisfied that she may have graduated high school. And she invents her own HRT protocol using unprecedented levels of estrogen and progesterone. She's written a book called Sex, Lies, and Menopause, where she outlines what her theory is. What she wants is to make all women, regardless of their age, to have the same levels of hormones as a 20-year-old woman. So her theory is she's into sort of more of a rhythmic dosing rather than a static dosing, and has all kinds of ways of defending this. What I'm going to show you now, just so you can kind of get a sense of what is really going on. I'm just going to bring this up. Oh, I'm sorry, I've actually got this already here.
Her latest book, Ageless, that has drawn the ire of some doctors for touting the benefits of something called custom compounded bioidenticals, an alternative form of hormone replacement therapy for menopausal women. It requires a doctor's prescription, but is not FDA approved.
This was on Good Morning America, shortly after the Larry King Live.
Hot flashes, hormones, and your health. She is a leading expert in HRT.
I think women are being led to believe through unsubstantiated claims that these custom compounded hormones are safer, more effective than conventional hormones. And in fact, there's no rigorous scientific or medical evidence for that.
These bioidentical hormones are custom mixed, designed to mimic the hormones of a woman in her 20s. Advocates say these are safer than traditional HRT because they come from plant extracts and not from a pharmaceutical company. Manson disagrees.
Just because something is natural doesn't necessarily mean that it's safe. Tobacco, arsenic, cyanide, they're all natural, but we don't assume that because of that they're going to be safe to consume in any quantity.
But Summers believes in bioidenticals, swearing to take them for life, despite numerous studies that connect long-term use of HRT and the increased risk of breast cancer in postmenopausal women. And even though she herself battled breast cancer, Summers says these reports don't scare her because the studies apply to pharmaceutical hormones and not the so-called natural ones she's taking. Summers follows a bioidentical protocol developed not by a doctor, not by a scientist, but by this woman, a former actress named T.S. Wiley. And though in college Wiley studied anthropology and not medicine, she stands by her own brand of custom compounded hormones she calls the Wiley Protocol.
So you're an anthropologist and you're trying to alter the course of women's health. Your credentials very much to the front line.
Oh, I don't think so. Do you think you need a license in this country to think?
That's not what I said.
That's credentials. I don't need a license to think.
But plenty of doctors disagree with how she thinks, including members of the American Medical Association.
Were you embarrassed when the AMA made a statement about you?
I was proud.
Really?
I was.
Frankly, I challenged the AMA and the Doctors of America and the Endocrine Society and the pharmaceutical companies to learn this stuff.
And she credits bioidenticals for restoring, well, just about everything.
I get to sleep, I get to wake up happy, I get to be the weight I want to be because I've chosen to eat right, and I get to have a delicious libido. I hate, oh God, this is just going to haunt me, but I think women need to know it can come back.
Okay. Well, now, the other thing I'm going to do is just bear with me. This is a relatively...
So where do you get this stuff, huh?
Yeah, well, that's what a lot of women were asking.
I imagine they do.
If you want to look like Suzanne Summers, you have to be on this website. Okay, this is the Wiley Protocol website, and you'll see it's very enticing if you've
Once there was a way to get back homeward. Once there was a way.
These are all the doctors that prescribe the Wiley Protocol. You can go down and find a doctor in your area. So if you were actually looking for somebody here in Kentucky, there is a doctor that does it. I'll find him for you. Right here. John Baird, apparently, MD. So these are, there are, I call these study sites. And I call that the participating prescribers co-investigators. And if you go through the home, there's all kinds of what is the Wiley Protocol, why the Wiley Protocol, when I was on this, how to get it, join the revolution, participate. There's all kinds of. Notice the music is very reminiscent to baby boomers in particular. It's that 1960s music. Notice how she co-opts themes from the old women's health lobby to make this more of a calling for, you know, reproductive civil rights, etc. So I won't spend a lot more time on this, but just to give you, it's the wileyprotocol.com, and anybody can explore the website and take a look. Okay, we'll get out of that. Now, when I was on my couch in 2006 and actually watching Larry King Live, take you back to the beginning, and I found this show. Here's what the show, I couldn't actually find any images from this particular show, but here's who was on. So they had Suzanne Summers on. They had two doctors who themselves say that they prescribe bioidentical hormones, who were furious with the book for actually including the Wiley Protocol because they say that it was an unregulated, untested protocol. They had T.S. Wiley on the show, so they had one of these large panels, and they had Wolf Udian, who is the I guess he's the executive director of NAMS, which is the North American Menopause Society. They had him on sort of looking at all of this, and it was a very confusing show. There were, between T.S. Wiley, Suzanne Summers, and the two female doctors who seemed to actually have competing books with Suzanne about their formulation for bioidentical hormones, you couldn't understand what was being said, except that they were cutting each other off. And what I was making out as an ethicist who has training in feminist ethics was that there was something very strange going on with all of this, and it sent me on a little bit of an investigative hunt for what is this stuff, what is going on, how can you have a woman who clearly has no credentials and is not trained inventing a protocol, and how did this get out of hand? And essentially it gets out of hand again because had Suzanne Summers not promoted it in her book, it wouldn't have sent thousands of women to join and participate in this protocol. Okay, I'm going to take you back in the journey and explain a little bit about the history of bioidentical hormones. So first of all, the historical nomenclature for, quote, bioidentical hormone therapy used to be called natural hormone replacement therapy. And there was a book that came out in 1969 by Katharina Dalton. She was a British family physician or a general practitioner. And Katharina Dalton is noted with actually coining the phrase premenstrual syndrome. And she was the very first physician that actually started working with natural progesterone as a treatment for premenstrual syndrome, and reported remarkable results, and that it seemed to balance women out, and she wrote about that for many years. Katharina Dalton then influenced another doctor by the name of John Lee. Has anybody heard of John Lee in this group? If you go and start searching out books on natural hormone therapy or natural progesterone, his name will rank very high in your Google listing. He's got a lot of books on Amazon. And John Lee was influenced by Katharina Dalton and was very interested in natural progesterone. He only worked with natural progesterone and claimed that it helped to restore fertility, it worked with PMS, it helped to deal with menopausal discomfort, so he was very into that. Then there was a physician by the name of Jonathan Wright, who's still around. He lectures on this. And Jonathan Wright wrote a book called, I believe it's called Natural Hormone Replacement Therapy. And he was known for inventing a triple estrogen therapy, or a triple therapy where it was 3 different forms of estrogen at different times. And he was the very first person to coin the term bioidentical. And he used the term bioidentical in his work. He only published one paper, and it was in the, I think it was in the Annals of, sorry, I'm forgetting where it was now, but it was not a very well-respected peer-reviewed journal. He essentially distinguishes patentable from unpatentable hormones. And he is basically saying that he is the first person to copy nature, and that to do it his way is more natural rather than to put women on the synthetic progesterones, which is known as progestin or progestogen in the UK. And that's how that's his claim to fame. Now, essentially, the idea that this whole term natural is very interesting, because the claim in this community is that hormones that are made from horse urine, from hormones that are derived from animals, can't be natural, but hormones, of course, that come from plants are natural. If you were to step into the thyroid world, which I spend a lot of time in as well, there are a number of thyroid patient advocates that claim that only thyroid hormone made from animals is natural. So there really isn't any, there's no consistency with what the patient advocates will often call natural. There are a number of, Jonathan Wright was very influential. And he trained a number of the current bioidentical hormone replacement therapy prescribers. And through his book, he was also very influential. When Suzanne Somers started to explore all of this, when she went into the world of natural hormone therapy and interviewed a number of prescribers, they repeated back to her the word bioidentical. She introduces that terminology in her book Ageless, and that's how it gets translated into the patient community. Essentially, the prescribers who are doing bioidentical hormone replacement therapy from plant extracts, compounded pharmacy products, most of them were actually doing them as an innovative therapy, which is perfectly fine and legal and ethical, and I will go into that. They were not doing them as research studies. Now, the bioidentical hormone prescribers, the representative websites of a lot of these prescribers, they self-identify as pioneers or experts in the field of bioidentical hormones despite no recognition of any expertise in the peer-reviewed literature. To give you an example, there is one female physician of note who calls herself a pioneer and an expert. When you actually look at her, she's not published anything in peer-reviewed journals. When you actually look at her training, she's an emergency room, she's trained in emergency medicine. She has absolutely no training in endocrinology, no training in women's health. I mean, that's not where she did any of her fellowships or specialties, but yet she calls herself a pioneer in hormone therapy. This goes on all over the place. You have a number of physicians who will say that they do integrative gynecology when they have absolutely no training in it. It's very common to see a crossing of practice boundaries. A number of the bioidentical hormone therapy prescribers actually they sell what they prescribe. Here's my own little blend. Here's, you go to the site and you can buy them, and I have lots of examples to show you, which will take too long, so I won't do that. But obviously, overt conflicts of interest. Some of them actually prescribe over the telephone. They invite you to call them, and they'll just go ahead and prescribe some hormone regimen over the phone based on reporting of patients of their symptoms. And of course, just a small little sideline, there are legal duties to be competent when charging fees, which seems like we should be reminding some of these people. Here are some examples of common claims by bioidentical hormone replacement therapy proponents. So a lot of these websites will all say the same thing, and Wiley's website is no exception, that there is a big pharma conspiracy, that it's really all a big conspiracy, because the way that it goes is because companies like Wyeth can't patent compounding products or plant-based hormones, there's a powerful lobby to prevent you from having this, even though it's better for you. Bioidentical hormones, they claim, are human identical. So again, it's that Jonathan Wright claim that it's copying nature. But I actually looked. There is no, I understand that to actually prove this, you need to have these crystallographic data that sort of demonstrates that the molecules are exactly the same, and that just does not exist. So again, you get this plant-based hormones are natural, animal-based hormones are synthetic, which is an untenable argument, and also if you sort of recall what's going on in diabetes, nobody sells animal insulin anymore. It's all actually synthesized. And also the idea that bioidentical hormone replacement therapy carries fewer risks than conventional HRT. That's a common claim that you'll see on these websites. Now, if you have someone who's prescribing bioidentical hormone therapy, and I'm going to, in this talk, just as a sideline, the Endocrine Society recently, they had put out a statement making it very clear that the term bioidentical hormone therapy is a marketing term and not a medical term. But for the purposes of this talk, I'll continue to call it that, because that's the lingo of the consumer. So anybody that prescribes so-called bioidentical hormones, that's fine. They can actually, it's perfectly legal, it's perfectly ethical to do that, because if they're doing it on one person as an innovative therapy, that's okay. They're not doing anything wrong. what tends to happen is that, so any notable departure from the standard of care, so it would be defined as an innovative therapy. So if the standard of care would be some sort of, I mean there are a number of FDA-approved brand name hormones that will do exactly the same thing. If they decide to depart from that for some reason, it is considered an innovative therapy. And they do make claims that women do better, etc. So if you're just sort of designing a therapy for one, it's an innovative therapy. When the innovation, however, starts involving data collection for the purposes of generalizable knowledge, which would include data sharing, publication, it is defined as research. You just can't get around that. The Wiley protocol makes it very clear that they want people to participate. They use terms like data gathering. They have presented. They are doing research. I also have to spend a little bit of time on discussing how did the situation become the situation, because you have to understand the considerable fallout from the Women's Health Initiative trial. Which was a trial, as you all know, that was halted early in 2002. What basically happened in this trial is that there were a number of women that were being put on a particular hormone therapy regimen, and they realized that some of these women were actually developing breast cancer at higher rates, and they were not happy about that. And also, they thought initially the idea of the trial was to see if it offered protection, cardiovascular protection, which they weren't seeing. So essentially, they did the right thing by stopping the trial. Equipoise is disturbed. They noticed some potential harms. They stopped the trial. This forced re-examination of all hormone replacement therapy guidelines, and the guidelines basically disappeared, and all physicians were essentially told, you have to deal with this on a case-by-case basis. You have to look at your patient, look at that patient's history, decide whether they would benefit from short-term replacement, but the general feeling was that long-term hormone replacement therapy was probably not a great idea, particularly for women who had histories of breast cancer, ovarian cancer, colon cancer, et cetera, and that it did not offer cardiovascular protection. That was another area. This basically forced women into sort of self-education. And where are women going to go for self-education? They're not going to read medical journals. They're going to read popular books, popular press, trade literature. So around this time, the most popular title that started to explain hormone replacement therapy and options became Summers' book, Ageless, where she tells women all about this wonderful stuff that you can go on, and the scandal of the WHI trial, and how they really didn't test the right hormones, and this is the stuff you really need to be on, and look at me, I'm so beautiful, look at my cover. And within the book Ageless, she refers to the Wiley protocol several times, several areas of text. T.S. Wiley is described as a legitimate scientist. It's described as a legitimate protocol. Women are given the website, the 800 number. This is the stuff you need. This is the stuff I'm on. I'm on this, and I even had breast cancer. What do you think about that? So that's the kind of text that's in the book, and before you know it, this New York Times best-selling book, Ageless, actually becomes a recruitment tool for the Wiley protocol, and that's how we got to Larry King Live to begin with. So it would take too long to sort of go into what the Wiley protocol is by taking you through the entire website. But essentially, so it's unprecedented doses of plant-based progesterone and estrogen, and it's designed, as I said, to imitate the cycle of a 20-year-old woman.
Unprecedented.
Unprecedented in the sense, I'm sorry?
The dose strength, etc.
The doses are higher, yes. Sorry, unprecedented high doses. Sorry, that was something that I should have put in there. Thank you. Wiley is in the, she calls her regimen patent pending. I don't believe she yet has a patent on it. When I spoke to T.S. Wiley, I understand she has a specific site in China that where she gets her hormones from. She turns it into a powdery substance. She has she feels that her process is patented and that her sources are pure, and this is the source for patenting it. And she's made up her own dosing, which is actually advertised in her book that I showed you earlier. This is the book that actually introduces it. This is what Wiley has to say herself on her website. It is a replacement regimen in significantly higher amounts than anyone has ever conceived of anywhere outside of fertility treatments. She offers this treatment to women 18 to 90, including breast cancer survivors. The research trial it openly recruits patients through its website. So as you saw, you go on the website, you want this stuff. You go find a doctor in your area. So if you lived here, you'd go to James Baird. He has to then, which I didn't go through on the website, he has to then send you to a widely registered pharmacy. She registers pharmacists and has them go through this expensive registration process where they learn to make it according to her specifications. And those are the only pharmacists that you're allowed to get it at. And then you pay for it as a patient.
Here's New Albany.
So you go to New Albany, that's where you would go. Essentially, so again, that the patient selects a participating clinician who, whether they realize it or not, are a study site for this stuff and are co-investigators. And then the patient, I have all these materials, but there's a very confusing document that they dispense to the patient that describes how you're supposed to do it. And you're supposed to fill a syringe up to a certain amount of cc's, and you have to put it exactly, I think, like right here, and mix it in. You can't bathe for 2 hours after. There's all these. It's very, very confusing. So the patients self-administer. Nobody shows them how to do it. They do it themselves. And as I say, it virtually assures non-compliance because it's so confusing. And then Wiley registers selected pharmacies, as I say, to make her invention so that they... I have looked at the pharmacy contract. And the contract, they actually have to stock a certain amount of, it comes in a little box with all these little syringes and the creams and everything else. So they have to stock a certain amount, but then they also have to stock her book. And the patient must buy her book as part of their, quote, informed consent process. Here's some other little tidbits. So the protocol is not IRB approved. I verified this myself by talking to T.S. Wiley, who didn't know what an IRB was. I spoke to some of the co-investigators, including one who was an oncologist who has several of her breast cancer patients on, and I said to her, come on, you're a bright, educated oncologist. You must have done cancer trials, clinical trials using different chemo regimens. What do you think you're doing? It's not research. Why isn't it research? And she didn't have very good answers. It does not meet any Belmont level criteria. I'll go through that in a minute. Very inconsistent data collection. So I spoke to three what I would call co-investigators, participating physicians, who are actually listed on her website. At the time when I was doing this research, they also had pictures of many of the participating physicians with statements and basically endorsing the protocol. Essentially, I contacted the people whose pictures I saw because I thought that these were actual endorsements and these are people that would be worthy of contacting. And one of them basically said that whatever informed consent takes place is really up to the individual practitioner. They don't have any set, there's no consent forms, there's no standard HIPAA waiver, there's none of that. And essentially, you're really at the mercy of how educated the participating doctor might be on these issues. They don't share data. They don't really report back to one another on their patients. So they don't really know what it is that they are collecting. The blood tests are all over the map. Also on the Wiley protocol website, there's a Q&A section or an FAQ section, which I won't go into. At least it was there the last time I checked in July. And women on this protocol are encouraged to go bypass their doctors, and they can get their own blood tests and get all of that done as well. So again, I think it's important to recognize that the PI has no credentials. There's no exclusion or inclusion criteria. So far, as of the date that I looked at this closely, which was probably in 2007, there were 1,000 participants enrolled, over 130 study sites with participating clinicians. And there's also a site, which I won't bring up, called WileyWatch.org, which was started by patients on the protocol who raised safety concerns and say they got sick. So I think that the bottom line is that the ethical use of compounded pharmaceutical agents in research remains unclear. And that is one of the reasons why this was able to sort of slip through under the radar screen. What I did to, in order to talk about the Wiley protocol, I felt that I really had to determine whether or not it met criteria for research, hence only then could it really be deserving of my scrutiny. So I coded a number of, the website is sort of the main document, if you will, but there were other documents to look at, such as the pharmacy contract. There are the books that send patients to websites. There are transcripts from media, such as the Larry King Live transcripts, etc. So I looked at all of the documents that I could find on this, and I searched for what we call existence criteria. Were these documents talking about research goals, human subject recruitment, data collection? Do they talk about methods or methodology? Do they discuss data sharing? And in fact, something that actually also came out on the Larry King Live episode that I watched. In fact, Wiley and one of her co-investigators, Julie Taguchi, presented at an alternative medicine conference. The source that I cite is actually where they make it clear that they did present data on women, from women on the Wiley protocol. Apparently what happened is that even the complementary alternative, even those participants at that conference raised a number of questions about safety and were quite alarmed at what they were looking at and asked a lot of questions, and apparently the presentation didn't go very well. But nevertheless, it was published in their proceedings about this conference. So essentially, just to go back, the main, is if this is research, then ethical scrutiny is valid, and that's what this is all about. I did not survey women who were on the protocol. I was not interested in their experiences. I was interested in looking at whether or not this was research, and if it was research, what is ethically of concern. The other, once I felt that this was research, I thought, well, let's go ahead and see, let's code for existence on whether there's any evidence of ethical trial design. IRB approval? No. Investigator expertise? No. Inclusion-exclusion criteria? No. Was it a scientifically sound design or rationale? No. Informed consent? No. Data safety monitoring? No. And was there a disclosure of conflicts of interest that would be also usual? No. I also looked at conflicts of interest and looked for the existence of conflicts of interest. Are there unusual funding sources? Yes. The patients pay for their trial, and if it were an FDA-sanctioned study, of course, you're not supposed to be paying for your own study agents. A regular trial sponsorship? Yes. I think the fact that that Wiley's own book sales are entangled with all of this is certainly unusual. There are also the way that she registers pharmacies. The pharmacy contract is a little odd. So I think that looking at the selling of trial agents, the selling of other products, and all of these unusual financial relationships should be revealed, which are not. So the results of my analysis are simply that the Wiley protocol is an unethical and unregulated trial. It's unregulated research that's exploiting vulnerable women. Last time I checked, menopausal women who may be going through many discomforts, are a vulnerable group, and there should be more protections. That's straight Belmont. We are defined as that. So here are some of the absolutely overt ethical problems. So I think the fact that there's no standardized informed consent, no standardized HIPAA waiver, there's no exclusion-inclusion criteria. I think the fact that the co-investigators are unaware that they are even doing research is a very large ethical problem. Unsound methods and scientific rationale, and I would say that you probably have an incompetent PI, and there are many co-investigators. When you look at the list of doctors, which you can go back and look at, some are doctors, some are naturopathic doctors, some are massage therapists, some are midwives, RNs. It's all over the map. A lot of people are doing boundary crossing. A couple of chiropractors, I think, are in there too. Here are the significant ethical problems. Well, I feel that enrollment is coerced. In looking at the website and in looking at the misinformation, looking at the fact that you have a very good-looking celebrity actress who looks pretty darn good for her 61 years of age, telling you that this is why she's looking good, I think there's a lot of coercion here. The protocol is obviously misrepresented in the popular press as a valid trial. Popular press meaning Summers' book, and prior there was a lot of, she also got a lot of press on her book before doctors started to actually question what she was saying. So again, when you have Wiley misrepresented as a credentialed scientist, that's a big problem. I think the fact that, as you saw from the website with the songs and the music and some of the statements made, I would say that the women's health movement terminology is co-opted by Wiley to misrepresent the trial as some sort of a reproductive health care civil right. She has a whole thing on join the revolution. We'd fought before, now we have to fight again for our reproductive rights, comparing this somehow to the fight for, the right to have an abortion, or it's just not, it's disproportional to what you're actually fighting for. Other ethical problems. So again, there's no disclosure of financial or other conflicts of interest. The physicians and the pharmacists and other healthcare providers actually receive CME training directly from Wiley, who is untrained and has no documented higher education. Now there is an ethical obligation on behalf of practitioners in order to be a credentialed physician. You should be trained by people who have some level of expertise. So the fact that they're actually receiving CME by someone who they know is not their peer, or certainly not an expert, I think raises questions about their competencies and their judgment. She can go ahead and offer these courses and offer CME training, but what does it say about the physicians who actually participate and accept the CME credit? On her website, there's a whole area where you can look at how you get your CME credits by taking her courses. Of course, she charges money for all of this, so physicians will, she encourages any physician that wants to be a prescriber and be part of this whole protocol to take this training. There are also some emerging studies. There's a study that's emerged through the University of Texas where one researcher is actually interested in looking at Wiley protocol patients. What I have a problem with, and it's my opinion, I haven't done a literature review on this, but I believe that if you're doing kind of a piggyback study where you're looking at women that were already unethically enrolled, and then you want to talk to them about their experiences on something that we don't even really understand has been properly collected or assessed, I think that too would be an unethical study, because it raises a lot of ethical concerns on the soundness of who it is that they're recruiting and what questions they're asking. I think that it's a problem that the clinicians involved in this deny they are doing research, and indeed after my paper in the journal Menopause was published, which was just in October, early October, we received a letter from Dr. Julie Taguchi, who's an oncologist, who actually has co-authored the book that I showed at the beginning of the presentation by Wiley, claiming that she's not a co-investigator on this. She has many patients, however, who are breast cancer survivors on the protocol, but she's not a co-investigator. So the fact that they don't understand that by participating and writing prescriptions and being part of all of this, that it actually makes them co-investigators is a problem. They don't understand what research is. Taguchi also presented her own data on her patients on the Wiley protocol, so it's all the more astounding that she still doesn't understand that she's involved in this. And I think that the other ethical problem is that I think at the very base level of all of this, maybe I'm paying a high compliment to Wiley by even calling it research. Perhaps it's just a business that's masquerading and claiming to do research because it sounds good and it makes money, and if we tell people that we're going to research this, maybe they'll spend money on it. So that might be, maybe they'll think that they're doing something altruistic somehow by, quote, participating and becoming part of something. So I think at the base level is maybe it's just a business and it's using all these terms, but that still doesn't excuse it from having to live up to all of, if they're going to say they're doing research, or if they're going to say that that's what they're involved in, and they're actually going to the point of a fairly good masquerade, then they are deserving of scrutiny. I think that the other issue is that this is a very good example of how patient misinformation about bioidentical hormone therapy has led to potential harms. First of all, if you imagine that you're just a consumer and you don't have any scientific or medical literacy, you know, you're bombarded with false terminology. The very term bioidentical hormones is a marketing term again, it's not a medical term. You're bombarded with information from many sides that this may protect against breast cancer. The whole notion that this is natural versus synthetic, which again is not a tenable argument. There are many misleading credentials by complementary and alternative medicine practitioners. There's a number of CAM practitioners that are all involved in this, claiming again that they're pioneers in women's health, etc., when they actually don't have any training in it. While this may not be true for some areas of endocrinology or medicine, in this particular case with hormone replacement therapy, a number of those who prescribe bioidentical hormones will claim that they can tell what hormone levels are based on salivary testing, and there's a number of peer-reviewed authors that just say this is just not true. You can't go by salivary testing in this particular area because hormones are going to be all over the place, and it's just you do it through symptom relief. So what this means is that a number of patients they're encouraged by the Wiley website to get their own salivary tests done. So you may have people who feel fine who are asking for greater amounts of hormones based on a test that actually doesn't tell you what's going on. So so you'll have some people on more, some people on less. It's just not a good indicator. There's obviously a very large disconnect between the peer-reviewed and the popular literature on this topic. And you know, I think that you have to appreciate that when patients are sent away to self-educate on an area that currently has no guidelines, you're sending people with no science or medicine backgrounds you know, to research this for themselves. They don't have any way to critically assess the literature and to critically assess what they're reading. Even when they read and try to make their way through the peer-reviewed literature, they're not going to understand what it is that they're reading. They're going to there's a great potential to misconstrue even the scientific publications. And I think, in conclusion, I think that where this is sort of pooling are challenges to autonomy and beneficence. You know, first of all, I think communicating the risks and benefits of hormone replacement therapy is challenging even when you're talking about standard HRT. I think that this is also a case where when women decide that they want bioidentical hormones. And incidentally, after Summer's book came out, reproductive endocrinologists' offices were deluged with phone calls from consumers. Do you prescribe bioidentical hormones? Do you have the Wiley protocol? Because that's what I want. You know, so they had to sort of deal with a lot of this deprogramming at the bedside or chair side, so to speak. Is this a situation where we abandon patients to their own autonomy? You know, if they want to go ahead and make bad decisions and do this, should we be stopping them? I think that the fact that there's no oversight, or at least there wasn't until very recently, of compounding pharmaceuticals, I think that you have to, this particular protocol has actually gotten the FDA to take a second look, and they're now actually starting to have more oversight into the hormones that are compounded at the very least, and that was something that the Endocrine Society lobbied for. And I think that it's the whole idea of patients designing their own therapies. Surely it's not just HRT. We've seen this with cancer therapies and other therapies, but I think this is in this particular case, this is probably where a lot of the challenges are lying. And you know, obviously it's unethical research. So we're also looking at we're looking at whether or not you know, patients are victims of, anybody can claim and state that they're doing research, and where and if you can just go on a website and participate in a trial, the patients are not aware, the potential participants are not aware of what regulated research looks like. So I think those are obviously the key issues, and I'm happy to have a discussion. I don't know how we are in our time, but...
We're doing great.
Okay.
And one that we have 40 minutes for discussion.
Okay, good.
So questions? Yes, Dr.
Yes.
How many participants? I mean, what's the scope?
Well, when I reviewed these documents in 2007, and I haven't done a recent review, I haven't done a review since then, like a careful review, we were up to 1,000 participants and 130 study sites in the United States and Canada.
You might even be so bold as to say subjects.
Sorry?
You might even be so bold as to call them subjects.
Call them subjects instead of participants. Yes.
Two questions. What do you see as your ethical responsibility to do something given the judgments that you've
Yeah, that's a very good question. And the other question?
What are the ethics of doing scientific research on the participants, you know, of this unethical research? Right.
Okay. So so the answer to the first question is, when I first started to become aware of this, I had also written on the ethics of bioidentical hormone therapy in general, because she's not the only one. She's one example, but there are other practitioners who cross practice boundaries who should know better. I mean, this woman is not trained, and so I think the expectations are lower. You know, the issue is that the scrutiny really is within the community itself. There are physicians that should know what research is, and they should know what the difference is between innovative therapy and research. And there are some physicians that have watched colleagues participate in this disdainfully, and they don't say anything. So I think this raises a lot of questions of professional ethics. What is your obligation as a professional to, you know, unfortunately, to whistleblow or to call your colleagues on ethical issues? As an ethicist, the only thing that I can do is what I'm doing, which was, it was no easy feat to get this paper published. In I think the journal where you're going to have the highest number of, you know, practitioners reading it. The paper that I wrote actually came to the attention of the very people that are participating in the Wiley protocol, because we've gotten letters from them, letters of protestation. But what I can do as an ethicist is call attention to it. I cannot, as a PhD, really judge what these women are on. I can't judge the science, but I can call something research, and I can look at whether there is ethical trial design going on, whether it does it meet the criteria for regulated or ethical research. That's the question that I can answer, and that's what I answered. By putting it out there in the peer-reviewed literature, I'm hoping that this will come to the attention of those in the community. And I make it clear in the paper itself, sort of what are the sort of in sort of a summary discussion section, that this protocol should not have gotten this far. And it would not have gotten this far were it not for the participation of hundreds of doctors, 130 study sites, who should know better and who should know what they're doing. What was scary to me was that when I verified facts by contacting, and I only contacted people who actually had identified themselves as being part of this protocol and prescribers, they really did not understand that they were doing research. They had, and so I think that this begs exploration into what are we teaching, everyday private practice physicians about research ethics and clinical trials. They obviously don't have training in this, or if they do have training, they must have forgotten it.
What do the doctors get for prescribing?
Well, they get money. Well, they get money from the patients that are paying them. They charge. Yes, actually, that's a very good question. What happens is that when you choose to go to a Wiley prescriber, Wiley protocol prescriber, they put you through a longer visit. They say that you need more tests so that they can monitor you while you're on the trial, because they look for signs of, endometrial tumors, whatever, signs of cancer. So some practitioners do more than others, and some actually are more conscientious about it, some are not. It just depends. I have heard from patients who've told me horrendous stories, patients who run their own website saying they were harmed. But they make money. They basically get more patients by having their names hung on a very popular website that is advertised in a New York Times best-selling book by Suzanne Summers. They are going to get more patients. That's the simple answer. Now, the other question, if you just want to...
Is it ethical to do scientific
other studies?
Unethical
Right.
research that you folks...
Well,
I mean, you have a natural, observational study with registered clients, known participating docs, known participating pharmacies. It's possible to find out who dropped out and who continued. It's also,
there is such a study going on at the University of Texas where they want to look at some of these things. I would say that if I were on an IRB, I would have problems with it, but you could have 10 other bioethicists on an IRB who would not have problems with it. I think it's just, I see problems because I think that I think that it would, the trial that you would want to design would have to be very careful about...
It's not a trial, it's an observational study.
Where you're actually just finding out who dropped out after the fact.
And adverse, consequences, if there are more cancers among, those who completed, the regimen compared to, published research.
One of the problems, I think that one of the problems with that sort of study is that we don't even really know what we're looking at with the Wiley protocol, because there's all kinds of problems with they don't even really know what they're collecting, because there's no, they don't share, there's no unified data sharing amongst the...
That begs the question then, because we're invoking the possibility of an unsafe therapy,
Yes.
but we're unwilling to prove that it's an unsafe therapy.
Well, I think that much would depend on how such a protocol would be written. I think that where I would have problems is if we were looking specifically at the already enrolled participants who were not who may not even realize that they're part of a research study. I think that's where I would have issues. But I think that this would be a 5-hour discussion across a table with people from a variety of disciplines, looking at what can we do, how can we do this ethically.
We have a question here, and please remember to repeat the question.
Yes.
I have a question with regard to the title of your presentation. To declare it unethical is to assume that you have reached conclusions based upon certain givens in terms of your data research, etc. I wonder if it might not be a safer approach to perhaps what you're saying, ethical issues raised by instead of declaring a final broadside that this actually fails on all tests, there's so many things in the American consumer market that go under the guise of availability and consumer demand that may even be more dangerous were they studied. And in part, you're dealing with that sort of unregulated market mentality in the United States with this issue. So I if it ought not be a bit more
just to collapse the question, so he's asking whether or not is it taking too far a leap to actually call this trial unethical? Should I be using more nuanced language rather than to declare it unethical? The answer is, in the actual paper that I put out in the peer-reviewed literature, the paper is actually just called an ethical analysis of the Wiley Protocol, where I raise ethical questions. I think that a trial that, in this day and age, a trial that does not go through IRB approval and is so overtly unregulated, where you have so many different problems, including co-investigators that don't even realize they're doing research, no informed consent, I would go to the extent of calling it unethical. I think it does meet that criteria. I think that in a lot of other kinds of scenarios, I don't know if you'd find the collection of issues that you find with this. I think this actually, if we don't call this unethical, then what is the word for? I think that's part of my...
require IRB approval for things that are funded by a federal agency. That requires the IRB intervention. Then you have a regulatory standard by which to measure the way in which this trial is conducted, and in which also to bring about reprisals or punishments for those who have been...
Well, either you're going to have... so he's basically, the question again is, not all trials require IRB approval to be considered federal trials. Either you're going to have, I mean, there are a number, if you're studying a drug protocol of some sort, even, you know, the FDA has many rules and regulations. It has to be regulated by somebody. There is some funding agency. There are no rules or regulations here that apply at all from any outside scrutinizing source, and I think that's where I have issues. We can go to I can come back to this. Yes.
Are these estrogens, progesterones? Did you say they're plant produced?
Yes, they are.
Does that make it recombinant DNA technology? Because I don't know of any plant that naturally synthesizes estrogen and progesterone.
I can't comment on the science of it, but my understanding of the protocol is that it's plant, it's compounded pharmacy. So they're using, I think that they use wild yams, and you know, it's the same stuff that, it's like a plant-sourced estrogens and progesterone, and they're compounding it, and that's the claim, that it's more natural, that it's easier, that the body responds to it better than synthesized hormones. But as somebody who's not, you know, I do not have any training in the science of it, but it's my understanding that it's an untenable argument. A hormone is a hormone is a hormone.
Do you have a follow-up?
No, I mean, if it's recombinant DNA technology, then you have a...
It is not recombinant.
Then it isn't estrogen and progesterone.
That's the question I was wondering who's driving.
I don't think it is. And if they're putting this out under a false, product, because I don't know of any plant that makes estrogen or progesterone.
This is why I said yesterday.
They're compounding it and they're extracting it.
The protocol actually does meet the ethical requirements of the introduction of a new medication or therapy, as long as it's 1808. I mean, if you look at 200 years ago, poultices and plasters were done just like this. This is how, Uncle Bob's snake oil was sold. And what we're seeing is that there's what I was saying last night to Sarah, is a temporal distortion field between what used to happen in terms of the introduction of new therapies, and I use this air quotes quite intentionally, and the lack of any kind of oversight, both in terms of the recruitment, but also in terms of the execution and follow-up to see if there's any benefit from this. And so the concern is whether we're witnessing something of snake oilism gone amok in the 21st century with no adequate oversight, because no one governmental oversight body says, we have purview here, we must intercede and say, stop this right now.
Now, the oversight, one of the issues that Dr. Dukas raises, too, is that there should be oversight from the professionals that are involved in this. I mean, there are a number of trained experts that are prescribing this that should understand what it is that they're doing, and they should understand the difference between innovative therapy and research. And the fact that they don't understand that makes me wonder what it is that we're teaching at that level. Perhaps research ethics is only taught at a minority of institutions.
The supreme irony that I pointed out last night was that the Food and Drug Administration was founded in 1906, and it was actually called the Wiley Act. So I think
That's right. That's right. Yes.
Well, to add to the issue of whether or not one can do research on these research participants and so on, this, as you presented it, this would never have passed IRB approval because it never would have gotten to the IRB.
That's correct.
It would have passed its scientific approval.
That's correct.
Because despite being labeled a protocol, it isn't. So
right.
Even if you are evaluating people who have been on the protocol, you have the foggiest idea what you're evaluating because you don't know how they've applied the substance, whether they've followed the rules or not. So I mean,
or what's in the substance,
or what it is.
Yes.
Right. So I mean, that I think is going to play in dramatically into the question of whether or not you can, how you would do a study on these,
right.
on these people. Because I'm not sure you're going to get any data that's of interest.
Well, the question again, or the comment, was the fact that how can you do follow-up research to a research protocol that never would have met anybody's approval to begin with because it was scientifically unsound, and et cetera, et cetera. Where there has been a lot of debate about this question actually derives from some of the Holocaust atrocity experiments. So if you, what is it that we can actually use as scientists from Nazi atrocity experiments? I mean, do we actually, the information that we may have gained about hypothermia or some of the medical experiments, what are we supposed to take from that? And there have been bioethicists that have been very firm that you cannot use that data for building further research because it was obtained so under such unconscionable conditions. Now, I'm not saying that the Wiley Protocol is, it's not parallel, but it's the same principle where you're looking at something that was found out through unethical means, and then we want to go and use that and further it somehow and build upon it. And I think that that's where, and I don't think that we're going to get a clear answer about that today, but I think that you would need a bunch of people at a table sitting around looking at this very carefully, designing something very carefully, and you would still wind up with 5 bioethicists with 5 very different opinions. But you don't, you're shaking your head saying that you think it's clear cut.
No. It's that I don't think you need 5 bioethicists to come with it. I think you can have 5 of any profession, because with such clarity in how people are actually applying the substance, whether or not the substance is actually even uniform across how it's made and so on, any data you get is going to be meaningless. I don't know what it's going to mean.
That's right.
It's food from a poison tree.
That's right. Let's start here, and then I'll do this side. Go ahead.
I mean, I have been in academic institution for a long time. We have our procedures to follow for any kind of trials or anything. So basically, I don't understand. I mean, I agree with you how patients can be abused, but there are, different categories of medicine. There's a natural product that we can purchase from health stores, and I would say, if the material is not well determined, I'm sure that, as he said, FDA would not take it, and IRB protocol would not be approved, and this wasn't passed through institutions neither. So, it's ethical. We said it's not just one-on-one, but when we look at clinical trials, see if this medicine is or drug is beneficial or not, it is abusing any different groups. So it has the right route if you will be approved for FDA drugs. So basically, as he said, the basis is very weak.
Okay, so if I can, forgive me if I'm going to try to boil this down. The comment and the question is, she doesn't understand how this even got this far to begin with, because even if you take away the population, even if we forget that we're even looking at women per se, we're looking at an actual study agent. How did it even make it this far? Because as a study agent, there's no proof that it offers any therapeutic benefit at all, and she doesn't understand. Every institution has its own rules and regulations, and how does it even get this far? So the answer to that question is, how did it get this far? I like to call it a perfect storm. I think that the environment under which this came about is the post-Women's Health Initiative trial environment, where there's mass confusion over guidelines and what to do about hormone replacement therapy. So I think that's one area. I think we're also in an internet age where anybody can be a publisher. Anybody can publish anything on the internet, and any consumer can access it. So I think we're in an era where patient misinformation on the internet is very widespread, and it's obviously not just related to here, but it's in lots of different areas. So you have a capability to massively communicate to a patient population. You have patients with no ability to critically assess what they're reading, and so they're going it's direct to consumer advertising in one way. And you also have the McCain-Feingold Act, which was passed in 1994, which was where you have the dysregulation of. Do I have the wrong act? You're looking at me funny.
Want to hear how this ends?
Isn't I thought it was the 1994 Act, the McCain-Feingold Act, where they slipped in this whole little bit about how nutraceuticals become dysregulated. There's no regulation of products that are considered nutraceuticals or herbal, sort of herbs and sort of nutritional supplements and all of that stuff. So products of compounding pharmacy, if they're coming from plant extracts, are actually considered covered under this, and they're not. There's no need to regulate them because they're plant-based, but the argument is that a hormone is a hormone is a hormone. So obviously this doesn't work.
Unless it's not. Hormones aren't made by plants.
Who else had questions?
Yes.
Along the same line, if Suzanne Summers had looked like most 61-year-old women, would this have gone as far as
I think that. Right. I think the reason why Suzanne Summers looks the way she is, and she actually, in the first clip that I showed, she said, "I get to be thin because I diet." so people don't confuse, so that she doesn't make the claim that her hormone regimen is making her thin. She's had work done. She's had plastic surgery. She has hairdressers and wonderful makeup artists, and she diets, and probably has her own chef. So yes, I would say if she looked like the average 61-year-old, I don't think that it would sell as well. Yes.
Two questions. First, you mentioned there are websites that exist now that claim that harm has been done as a result of these protocols. I'm curious about whether there have been formal lawsuits that have been filed as a result, because that would certainly impact the operation.
There have not. There have not. There was when I talked to the organizer of this website, it was a former patient. I actually retained her anonymity. If she asked me to, she retains her anonymity on her site, and claims to have heard from 200 different women. Who knows if this is true? No way to verify it. She says that she looked into launching a class action lawsuit, and they had actually with a number of patients, but the expense, and she says that she's actually been harassed by Wiley herself, and so there's a lot of reasons, but there has not been a successful lawsuit filed as of now. That's true.
The second question was, is this an issue you could bring, or some group could bring before the AMA's Council on Medical
medical ethics, or whatever the business is.
Well, this particular protocol has been brought to the attention of the Endocrine Society, which has taken it to the FDA, and there are a number of people who are very upset about this. And that's one of the reasons they were actually able to get the term bioidentical hormones. The FDA now agrees that that term is a marketing term and not a medical term. And so I think they're working on getting more regulation in this area. But yes, I mean, obviously I could, you know, the article is out there. If somebody wants to Google the Wiley protocol, they will find the article.
I think the point that you're driving at would be that if you want to try to sanction people, you can't sanction Wiley, because guess what?
You can sanction the physicians?
You'd have to sanction the physicians one by one. AMA is a light touch because people who are members of the AMA can go ahead and sign up or resign at a whim. But state boards, that's a different thing. Losing your licensure, you know, stripping you of the covenant of trust between patients and society, that's a different thing. You actually get people right at the economic process.
Yes.
I'd like to make a comment. What set me off when I heard your presentation, you know, was the implication of mega-dose hormone, you know, replacement, and hearing comments from the gentleman up front about, you know, phytoestrogens and dosage. I doubt that that's, you know, a valid claim, and if that's the case, this whole thing may be more of a, you know, placebo, you know, type effect with a transdermal, you know, phytoestrogen, you know, effect. And I really like what you've done. You know, I mean, you've taught me about terms like, you know, innovation, you know, and research, you know, but I think that the primary issue is about, you know, fraud, you know, and it's a dime a dozen, you know, on the internet.
Well, in the and I don't have a slide on this, and I should have. I actually the dosage regimen that the Wiley shall we say subject would be trying out is actually made public in T.S. Wiley's own book.
Right, but you don't know that's what actually.
We don't know that that's what they're actually taking.
Take some of the stuff from the New Albany pharmacy.
That's correct.
Do a chromatography on it and find out what the heck is in there and what is the actual amount.
You don't know what they're. Let's put it this way: the dosage as advertised.
Right.
And the dosage that the participants are supposed to be taking is considered very sort of high and sort of outrageous and scientifically unsound. And reproductive endocrinologists that have looked at these dosages sort of said this is crazy. However, the criticism is, the flip side is, very few women would be able to withstand this, and they're not. Believe me, they're probably not taking this level. They're probably just taking a little bit, and so we don't know what we've got. And it's back down to what you're saying. So we don't really know what it is that they're doing, but the very fact that women are attempting it. Yeah.
What's the absorption rate of this stuff? Are they just putting on an estrogen-containing skin cream?
It's transdermal, and I don't think that anybody, the science, see again, what it is that they're claiming, the whole raison d'etre behind the Wiley protocol is that they're supposed to be, they're claiming that a superior therapeutic benefit. There's no way that, based on how they're designing their study, they can ever answer that question. And I think it makes it an unsound, it's unsound scientifically, which is why it would never pass an IRB approval, because it's scientifically unsound to begin with.
Who published Wiley's book?
Oh, that's a good question.
Don't say Wiley published.
No, I have to. I'm sorry, I don't remember. I have to look at. But it was a reputable publisher, one of the New York publishers. I just have to. I'm sorry, I don't remember.
There's a company, I think Rodale. They do a lot.
It's not Rodale. It's a reputable publisher. And she has 2 co-authors, one an MD and one a PhD, on the book. Any other questions?
Well, I want to thank Dr. Rosenthal and all of you.
Thank you very much.